My son's missing. He's taking out my myself up high. I want I don't know where he is. Can somebody please come help me? She's gone.
Hi everyone. So many people are having technical issues just trying to make videos these days. Some lose sound, some files get corrupted, some can't upload. In my case, it's that I'm having trouble with my camera. I really think that it's spiritual warfare, and I can recreate it. It's the craziest thing. I guess let me show you. I'm a little nervous about this, but here goes, because no one would believe it if I didn't show them. Have you ever seen a camera do this when you tried to hit pause, restart? See, this is what I'm saying. Oh. This is ridiculous.
What's going on?
I got you. Anyway, as you can imagine, having to deal with these sorts of camera issues really eats up a lot of unnecessary time. Anyway, this whole Apophis thing, at least with regards to when I began to take notice of it, not when Tom Horn dreamt about it and talked about it years ago before his passing. I took notice of it with this video I did over a year ago, and about a month before I even went to visit the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. Titled April 8th, Last Biblical Eclipse for 20 Years. I'm at Ark in Nineveh X on New Madrid Fault. Is this it? So I guess that was a pretty long title. And in it I noted that for some bizarre reason CERN was planning to fire a beam into space during the eclipse. NASA was planning to fire 3 rockets into space during the eclipse, with the name Apep written on each. And Apep is the Egyptian snake god, also known as Apophis. Here's some pics. Apep, Apophis, CERN, NASA, all on April 8th while I was at the Ark, which was 1 hour north of Nineveh, Kentucky. Then flash forward to this year, and Sister Linda Stark, whom I met and became friends with on Telegram some time ago, shared an old video of Tom Horn's about his dream done some 5 years prior, telling me, you should look at this, and the rest is history. So in Tom Horn's video, and books that he wrote as well on the subject, he talked about dreams that he was having about the word Apophis before he even knew there was an asteroid by the same name. And he would also dream about October 2025 specifically. Now this was years ago. He was dreaming about October 2025 being the start of something. When later, Tom said, when he began researching into Apophis and realized it could be the wormwood of Revelation 8, and that it would occur at the midpoint of the tribulation, he even did his timeline of it in his book. Notice, however, he didn't do math or anything based on scripture. This is why I took what he dreamt, though, as having something to it. It's like in the Bible, the way it describes certain events through the eyes of witnesses. It would state seemingly unnecessary factoids like, and at midnight on the 7th day of the 7th month, such and such happened. And to the casual Bible reader, it's in one ear and out the other. But I took it one, possibly 2 steps further than Tom by giving weight to what Tom said about Apophis being the wormwood in Revelation 8, beginning at the midpoint. I'm getting ahead of myself in the video, but I'll just leave it here. Beginning at the, or being at the midpoint of the tribulation. So assuming that that's true, I looked at the date that NASA was saying Apophis would do a super close flyby of the Earth, as in 1/10 of the distance between the Earth and the Moon close flyby. And they said that Friday the 13th, April 13th, 2029. And if that was the midpoint, we know the first half of the tribulation is 1,260 days. So doing simple math, counting backwards from Apophis as the anchor in the center of the tribulation, 1,260 days prior is October 31st, 2025, which also happens to be the day Mike, RepoMan64, has on his timeline as the day the flood starts. So I took that as further confirmation that this is true. In fact, rather than rehash all of this, I'll just replay what I said about this in my previous video. Let's get started with why the sudden urgency. What's got me so certain the world is about to end? Start with Apophis, the wormwood prophecy of an asteroid hitting the Earth in Revelation 8, which is at the center of the tribulation. After a sister, Linda Stark, who subscribes to my Telegram, unearthed that old video of Tom Horns from like 5 years ago and shared it with me, and I did some quick math that showed if you count backward from Friday the 13th, 2029, assuming that's the middle of the tribulation, if you count backward 1,260 days, it lands exactly on October 31st, 2025. But there's something I didn't tell anybody. Since I did my last video, I actually found another confirmation that sealed the deal for me. As I've said before, I use the Essene calendar. So when I count backwards, 1,260 days, or the duration of the first half of the tribulation, assuming again, Apophis is what I think it is, from Apophis to find the start of the tribulation, it brought me exactly to the date the flood started, October 31st, confirmed by Mike, RepoMan64, on his timeline, and with a personal confirmation for me, as October 31st also happens to be my wedding anniversary. So I thought I should use Apophis as the anchor and count both directions, forward and backward in the tribulation, and see what happens. So I counted forward from Apophis, 1,335 days to be exact, and it lands on December 8th, 2032. December 8th, 2032 on the Essene calendar is Kislev 25, the first day of Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah all about? In a single bullet, Hanukkah commemorates the Maccabean victories over the forces of Antiochus Epiphanes, Antichrist, and the rededication of the temple. What is the millennial kingdom in a single bullet? It commemorates Jesus' victory over Satan for us, with Jesus ruling personally with us at his side, and rededication of the temple, in this case for Gentiles, our bodies, and for the Jews, the apple of God's eye. Jesus will reset everything in their own new temple, including feasts, everything, removing Satan's deception. Is December 8th, 2032, the first day of the millennial reign of Jesus Christ after casting Satan into the pit? I believe it is. Knowing the tribulation starts in 2025, we now watch and wait, but not just wait for the rapture, because God has given us the Tarry. Why? So those of us currently blessed to have been called to worship him can warn and push as many as we can onto the ramp of the ark and inside the door before the door closes and the age of grace ends. All right, I'm back. So in that clip, you heard me mention I counted forward 1,335 days on the Essene calendar, and it came to December 8th, 2032, the first day of Hanukkah. In Mike's latest video, he gave me a shout out about this, but he also mentioned that he too had done the calculations counting forward 1,335 days to December 8th, 2032. So that's a double confirmation, at least in relation to what both Mike and I were discussing, separate from one another. But Mike also said something more that I didn't, in that he counted forward also 1,260 and 1,290 days. I'll play his clip so you can hear him explain it himself.
On atonement, we have a lot of stuff happening because this is when they're going to accept their false Messiah, and this is when they're going to realize that Jesus was actually the correct Messiah, the one that they pierced. So we go on to this date. Now, I couldn't help, David the Watchman found this Apophis, and he did some math, and I was shocked at his math. On April 13th, 2029, Apophis will come through, and he did math. He says, if you count back 1,260 days, you land here. I was like, that's incredible. It lands on Halloween. If you count forward 1,260 days, you land on the Day of Atonement. How perfect is it that on April 13th, that this Apophis is coming in? I decided to go ahead and count another 30 days, and it lands on the day Noah entered the ark. Doors open, Noah goes to the ark. Right there, and then the other 45 days, which is the 1,335 days, on December the 8th, which is Hanukkah. I think that's when Jesus' millennium begins. 75 days after the end of tribulation, 75 days later, I think the millennium begins.
And furthermore, I chat mostly in the background with fellow watchman Brett from God's Land Down Under and Sister DJ there, and Matthew from A Billboard for Christ channels. And Matt, rubbing my nose in things, brought up, hey, remember back when I did these countings before all of this Apophis stuff and arrived at the same thing? So we revisited that thinking. Actually, I'm doing this quick and dirty style by simply sharing with you the back and forth three-way discussion we were having. It ranged, and we just bounce ideas off of one another, then go off and do our individual research. So here's some behind-the-scenes insights into how we operate. I'll start with this, the picture that's on the screen. I posted this verse from Matthew 25, and I'll just read from the chat to save time. All right, so Matthew 25, verse 6, but at midnight there was a shout, look, the bridegroom is coming. So I underlined midnight. And then in the chat I was talking to Brett at the time, I think. I said rapture at the end of the second watch, which is 12 midnight Jerusalem time, or Israel daylight time. And it states the bridegroom approaches at midnight. The shout is either a warning or is the shout of Jesus, like, come up here. What is another aspect of midnight? That is when the world is at its darkest, and that can be taken multiple ways if we're including parables. But Jesus only spoke in parables in front of Pharisees, knowing they wouldn't get it. So I lean towards this being literal. And then Brett says, that word shout may be a link. Cross-check in the original language. So I was going to go and look at it when I got back to my computer. I think I was at a restaurant when I was thumbing this into my phone. He says, his followers also heard the same parables. The distinction is between those that understood them and those that didn't. So the same words were both to enlighten and to conceal. It's a two-edged sword. Then I said, it just occurred to me, based on what you said, this is articulating the reason for the Tarry. When the world is at its darkest is when the bridegroom will come. So keep oil in your lamps and watch. The encouragement is it will happen at midnight, the shout rather. And then Brett says also the story of the good man and the virgins dancing at midnight for husbands, all midnight. In comparison, the normal time for full sunshine, midday, we know to expect a darkening event, which then reminded me of the eclipse, which would be when the world is darkest. And then Matt joins in, and because we had also been having a side conversation about something else, and then Matt says, for Brett's clarity, the video David and I were discussing was about the Essene calendar and how the events do line up for 2025. Many of us believe that October 31st is the flood date. If we add 1,260 days, it brings us to Apophis on April 13th, 2029, bringing us potentially to mid-trib. Then if we add 1,260 days to that, it brings us to September 24th, 2032, which is a day of atonement on the Essene calendar. Lastly, if we add to that the additional 75 days, 1,290 and 1,335 difference, it brings us to December 8th, 2032, which is day one of Hanukkah. Again, these seem to only line up with the Essene calendar. And along the way, in keeping with the Essene calendar, and what I'm watching is April 8th, which is the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then you mentioned 420, which is 10 days prior to 430. Before I move on from that, though, I just noticed that April 8th. So we received what I thought was the warning on April 8th, 2024, when I was at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky in the middle of the X of the eclipses, during the eclipse on 4/8. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that, or probably still think that that was the sign of Jonah, the only sign that will be for a wicked generation. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting that the very next year, 2025, is also one of the highest watch dates. So, moving on. Then Matt said, when we discussed it before, I hadn't mentally put together it was 420, which is popular amongst the alternative crowd. Maybe an additional feast into mourning reference. And Matt said, I forgot to add that some believe in the 6-month gap between rapture and tribulation, while other, I believe, bones from Dr. Barry, believe in a 6-month and 10-day gap. Brings us to into late April as a high watch. And then last thing about Apophis, George from Return to the King has also started to talk about Apophis. He didn't really draw conclusions from it in his video. Rather, he pretty much just read what Tom Horn said about Apophis and how Tom Horn's dream from years ago pointed to something major happening 3.5 years before Apophis. And now, and even how Tom arrived at somewhere around mid-October 2025, not even realizing how close he was in his dream to the day that the flood started in October 31st, 2025, according to Repo Man. Anyway, I said I was going to keep it short, all joking aside with regards to my silliness about having difficulties with my camera at the beginning. My life is crazy right now, so I think I'm going to try and do shorter videos aimed at encouraging the brethren as we wait together, occupying and redeeming our time, and helping to carry one another's burdens as we try to help others onto the ark before the door closes. I pray that this blessed someone. God bless.